Dobyns is known for making impressive rods. However, does the Colt follow in that lineup? Let's find out in today's video. Before we go into the features and my overall thoughts on this rod, let's go over the specs on the one that I have in my hand right here. This guy right here is the CL103C, and this is going to be a 7-foot rod. This is going to be a medium heavy power with a fast action. The guides are 9+ tip. Line weight is going to be 10 to 17 pound. Lure weight is going to be 1/4 ounce to 3/4 ounce. This is a one-piece rod, and the MSRP is coming in at around $79.99. Now, this rod was a little bit trickier to get a lot of information on. However, I did still find some information about the features on this rod. The three that stuck out to me the most were going to be the high modulus graphite blank, the Kevlar wrapping, and the C guides. As for looks, I'm actually really impressed. I really like what Dobyns did on this rod. You wouldn't think orange and green would go together really well, but in this case, it looks awesome. I mean, I love that Dobyns green logo right in the middle there with the orange, the orange little mini like 1-inch spot there, and then you have the green accents, kind of the green thread accents all the way through. I think it's a really neat look. It's very unique on the market right now. And then I also like the fish to win. Dobyns does that on all of their real seats right there. This is a split grip foam bait cast rod right here. Now, a lot of your cheaper rods are going to be that split grip foam like that. If you want to get into some of your nicer cork stuff, I feel like you've got to go up in price a little bit. The Dobyns Furies actually have the cork on them, which I personally really like. I like the cork feel, but the foam on this one doesn't feel like super cheap. It feels pretty good in your hands. So I'm not gonna knock it there. I like how Dobyns organizes their rods in terms of the colors. Right, you've got your Colt, which is the orange, and then you've got your Mavericks, which is blue, the Furies, which is green, and then as you go up into your Champions and your Ecstasies, it's kind of different shades of blue and some other colors going up. I like how they did that in their rod lines. It gave each one of them kind of a unique look, gave it some character, and yeah, the Colt definitely is a well-known rod now. When you think of the orange Dobyns rod, you think of a Colt. Now, as for the versatility and function, this rod is kind of unique in the fact that it is a bass rod that also has panfish models. You don't really see that a lot with a lot of bass fishing companies. They don't really make rods specifically targeted for other fish. And Dobyns is definitely a bass fishing company. I mean, that's what they're known for, is bass fishing rods. But they've got some really cool sizes on their website here. They have it pretty organized on their website here. They have some Colt spinning rods. They have a bunch of models of Colt casting rods. They have a Colt crankbait rod. And then they also have some panfish rods. Some of them are spin cast rods, but then there is one in there which is a spinning. It's a 6-foot light, which I think is kind of cool. And like it's not marketed as a finesse bass rod. It is marketed as a panfish rod, which I think is a pretty cool little, bonus in there, especially for you guys. A lot of us like to fish for bass, but then we also like to fish for crappie and do other stuff on the side. So I think it's cool that a company kind of expanded on that and did something different in the same lineup. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're shopping for Dobyns rods is, at least in my opinion, they tend to run a little light. So this guy right here is a medium heavy. To me, it feels more like a medium. Same thing as like their Dobyns 734C. That's like the classic rod. Like when you think of your all-around bass rod, a Dobyns 734C is like the go-to, right? And that rod is a heavy. I never use heavy action rods. Like there's very few times where I use a heavy action rod. With that rod, I use all the time, and I use for a bunch of different things because it feels a little more like a medium heavy instead of a heavy. And I know I'm not the only one with this opinion. I know there's people out there that also agree with me on this, but just something to keep in mind when you're shopping. If you're looking for a medium action rod, you may want to go up to the medium heavy, and it's going to fish a little bit more similar to what you're used to with other brands. As for the durability and build quality, Dobyns has always been known for making durable workhorse rods, and the Colt is no exception to that. It feels exactly like your Dobyns Furies, exactly like your Dobyns Mavericks, your super kind of just workhorse grit rods that you can use for pond hopping, for, pitching jigs and doing whatever you want in terms of that like real hard, those tactics that are a little bit harder on your gear, like those big swinging hook sets. Like these Dobyns rods do a great job at handling all of that. And the Colt is no exception. They also have a bunch of the spin rods as well in there. So if you're wanting finesse fishing, or you want a finesse finesse rod that also is going to stay durable. You know, some of these finesse rods on the market, I feel like you breathe wrong near them and they break. This one is not going to be the case with that. Now, as for the feel and sensitivity, this rod is, I would call this exactly average. I wouldn't say this rod is like not sensitive at all, because, you know, they're okay. But I think they're not also overly sensitive, and there's definitely rods that are more sensitive than this that are around that same price point. So I would put this at a good average. In my opinion, Dobyns rods have never stuck out to me as being super sensitive. I know a lot of people say they are. In my opinion, after using the Daiwa Tatula XTs, after using the Fenwick Eagles, after using some of these other rods in this kind of same price point, I just feel like they're not uber sensitive. They're not ultra sensitive, at least compared to some of these other rods, but they're not lacking either. I mean, I fish jigs with these, I fish Senkos where I've got to feel a bite. Like I can still feel some bites with them, but just not as much and not as many lighter bites compared to some of those other rods. But for $80 for that, for that around that $80 price range, I think this does a great job. I mean, it does exactly what it's meant to do on that. Now, as for casting, I feel like these rods do a great job. I guess, with rods, casting isn't as big of an issue as it is more with like bait cast reels. I feel like I dive further into that category on those than a rod, but the rod does have a nice load. It's going to cast a bait really well, especially if you pair it with a decent reel. I think a great one for this would be like the Abu Garcia Revo X. If some of you are kind of wanting the colors to match too, that's a great reel at a great price point. And the orange and black whole system, I think would look really, really nice with this. Yeah, those two paired up would be a great little combo that's going to cast a ways, even with lighter lures. Now, as for price, I would say these rods I would call it pretty average. I mean, I think they did a good job of pricing it at $80. I think if it was any more than that, and I don't think they would be as worth it in my opinion, I think going up a little bit more to that Dobyns Maverick or the Dobyns Fury, I think is a really good choice in my opinion. I love the Furies. I've been using them for a long time. I am a huge advocate of that rod. It is such a workhorse rod, especially like for you pond guys. You want just kind of a one-stop shop, just carry a bait caster, go walk to some ponds, throw frogs and Senkos, and you want something durable. That's a great option, as well as this. It just kind of depends on how much you're willing to spend on that. But this rod right here, to me, this has guide rod written all over it. Like if you're a bass fishing guide and you want a rod that is still nice enough to give your clients a good experience, but also not too nice and too expensive to where you're worried about them breaking all your gear, I think that's exactly what this rod was made for. I think it's a great choice for that. And most of the time, guide rods are good rods in general, and I do think this is overall a good rod. The only reason why I'm really not hyping this rod up in price too much is just because there are a couple rods that you spend a little bit more money, like the Daiwa Tatula XT or the Fenwick Eagle, a couple of those rods in there where you spend just a little bit more money, and I feel like you are getting a big jump in terms of overall quality of rod, in terms of sensitivity and everything included. If I were to make a most durable bass fishing rods under $100, this potentially could be number one though. I do think this is going to be an extremely durable rod that if you're needing a workhorse setup under $100 to go just get her done, right? This would be an awesome choice for that. Okay, so let's go over the pros and cons of this rod here real quick. Now, as for the pros, right? This rod is super durable. It just has that just tough feel to it. It's going to last you a long time, especially if you're fishing frogs, Senkos, you're doing that, the rough weeds, flipping and pitching, like that type of those types of techniques. This rod is going to work great for that. The other thing is this rod's extremely versatile. They have a crankbait rod. They've got a ton of different bass casting and spinning rods, and they even got a panfish rod thrown in there, which I think is really cool. The other thing is price. I think $80, that's an extremely affordable rod, especially, all things considered as far as bass fishing rods go. $80 is nothing, and I think you're getting a pretty good rod for that money. As for cons, it's not the most sensitive. Not that I'm saying it's below average, but it's also not above average. I think it's pretty much right in the middle on that. I feel like for a little bit more money, you can get a rod that is much more sensitive than this, but it does okay on that. As for a rating, I'm going to give this a 7.9 out of 10. I think it's a great rod. I think you're getting your money's worth on this rod, especially if you're a pond fisherman, especially if you're fishing frogs, Senkos, spinner baits, you're fishing lures that are a little bit heavier, take a little bit more of a durable kind of, a really good good load on the rod to be able to cast and to be able to have that strength on hook sets, I think this is one of the best choices you can make for 80 bucks. If you want something ultra sensitive, if you're wanting like a really sensitive jerkbait rod or something on that, you know, something in that range, I would probably spend a little more money and go with the Tatula XT. I think that's just a little bit better of a rod overall for some of those, you know, some of those techniques in there. But yeah, overall, I think it's a great rod. I think it's worth the money, 100%. I also don't know if I mentioned this yet or not, but Dobyns, every run-in I've had with Dobyns company as a whole, I've been super happy with. They've had really great customer service and they've taken care of me. So I feel like that's something that I've got to add in there too. I really like the company. Now, if you want to learn a little more about that Revo X I was telling you, the reel that would pair up really great with this rod, I will put that right here. If you guys also want to see some other good rods under 100 bucks, I will put that video right here for you. So hopefully you guys got a kick out of today's episode. Hopefully you learned something, and we'll see you guys next time on Humbug Videos.